described. In fact, if one were to look at the various ways in which burials are described in the Hebrew Bible, one would realize that over the course of early Israelite history, there were actually a lot of different ways that bodies were buried, right? When we think about, for example, Jacob and Joseph, right, died in Egypt, they were both embalmed, right? We read about a burial being done very quickly, but we read about it in the case of a person who was convicted of a criminal offense and was put to death. That person's body shouldn't be out there.
Okay, I'm in.
A period of time. So we learn about the custom of burying quickly from that circumstance. So we see that there's all sorts of different kinds of burials, and the things that we learn are not because the Torah, as it does in other cases, kind of said, okay, here's how you do it, but it mentions laws about other things, and as I said, we infer from them our own practices. And I don't think that's accidental, because as a number of my teachers have always pointed out, and as many teachers will share, Torah's main focus has always been on life. And there were elements about death and the cults that surrounded death that the Torah sought to distance itself. And so there's a speculation that, yeah, it doesn't focus on these rituals that much. It just doesn't talk about it. It's not its interest. So with that having been said, we understand that there's really no mention whatsoever of a Chevra Kadisha or burial society or practices in the Torah. In fact, the first time that we hear about a Chevra Kadisha of any sort comes in the Talmud. So I just wanted to share here one source that we have in the Talmud. This comes from the Talmud Moed Katan, which is one of the tractates, one of the 20 tractates within the Talmud itself. And Moed Katan deals with the issues of minor holidays and also Chol HaMoed, the days between the holidays. So it's a fascinating little tractate. And here's a story that it describes, or that it relates in the Talmud. It says, it once happened when Rav Hamnuna came to a place called Barumata. He heard the sound of the shofar announcing that a person had died in the town. When he saw some people doing work, he said to them, let these people be under an excommunication. Is there not a dead person in town? They said to him, there are separate groups in town, each one responsible for its own dead. Knowing that the deceased was not from our group, we continued our work. He said to them, if so, it is permitted to you, and he revoked his excommunication. Okay, so a few interesting things that we learn in this Mishnah about the rituals surrounding death. First, right, when someone dies, how are people informed of this death? Just unmute yourselves, chime on in.
Well, here it says shofar.
Right. So the shofar, right? Just want to point out, it's not just for Rosh Hashanah. Right? The shofar as an instrument really was an announcing tool that was a clarion call to various towns. So the shofar is blown, and the town has the custom that when the shofar is blown, what that means in that town is that someone has died. And one of the things we can infer from the text is that when someone dies in the town, what's the expectation?
Everyone will go help.
Right? Everybody stops. Right? And everyone joins in. And what they join in with is the procession. Right? And one of the fascinating things about burial customs is that most cultures have funeral processions of some sort. Right? People will have sometimes different orders for things, different arrangements and so forth, but a procession is sort of almost a universal quality about funerals. And so the understanding was that everyone would participate. And we know this because when Rav Hamnuna sees that not everyone is participating, he gets so excised, he places an excommunication upon him, a ban, a cherem upon them. By the way, as an aside, they told us in rabbinical school that we should never do this. It's a discouraged practice at this point in time to place people under bans and excommunications. Anyway, but boy, there were times that I was tempted, I will say. Anywho, okay, so he was so excised. Now, by the way, the strength of his emotion, the excommunication and so forth, all kibitzing aside, what it shows is how strong he understood the obligation for everyone to stop what they were doing. Right? This was a powerful, understood custom. And he was incensed that it wasn't being observed. And the thing is, the people in the town understood why he was incensed, because what did they say? They said to him, there are separate groups in town, each one responsible for their own dead. Right? And knowing that the deceased was not part of their group, they knew they didn't have to stop, which meant that the town had a number of different chevra. Right? They're not necessarily referred to as Chevra Kadisha yet, but a number of different chevra, number of different associations. And among the things, at least that we learned from this, is that within your chevra, that group was the one who took care of all the rites and rituals surrounding your death and burial and the mourning practices that followed. That was the group that was responsible. By the way, the conceptual model of this is something that Harold Schulweis picked up on, and he brought to Valley Beth Shalom, called the Chavurah. Right? That's really what this was. You had your Chavurah, your smaller intimate group within the larger town that served the functions that the whole town was meant to serve for each other, in this case surrounding death, burial, and mourning. That this is the first mention of it, and really one of the only mentions that we see. It'll come up in other places, but more in depth, what these groups were made up of, how these different groups were constituted, we don't know anything. There's really so very little that's shared about it. But what we do see through certain examples in the Talmud and in later literature is that these chavurot did not, as we see in the Talmud, only deal with death. That these chavurot were almost like gimilut chasidim associations, and all sorts of caring and needs that were required were done within this small group for one another. Right? So it's a fascinating social construct, really, of how to make smaller communities within these larger towns, such that the needs of the people could be met. And like I said, this was Harold Schulweis's idea about creating Chavurot in synagogues. The synagogue had become the large town, and he wanted to create smaller groups of people who knew one another. Okay, now, what we also will see as history unfolds, right, from the time of the Talmud up until, roughly speaking, the 14th century, is that these Chavurot focused primarily on Gimilut Chasadim, and they were also, the services were limited, as we see in the Talmud, the services were limited to people within the group. And the group itself became one where the position in the group was hereditary. So eventually it gets passed on from parent to child, primarily in this case, though, from father to son. And it was seen as this great honor to be part of one of these chevra. And therefore it's been written about how people will inherit from their father, and it's a joyous occasion. And these little groups were almost like these little sub-communities unto themselves. And that's all we really know. We don't really know a lot more. But what we do see is that in the 16th century, there's a shift. And in the 16th century and then in the 17th century, two things happen. First, we start seeing that in some of these chavurot, they actually do just become focused on burial. We don't know why, but the historical records that are found within the Jewish communities at the time show these chavarot becoming focused on burials, but we don't need read anything about any kind of rituals or anything. That comes along later. And two things happen. First, in 1569, the first official Chevra Kadisha is actually formed in Prague. We don't know what actually prompted it to be formed at that time, but a rabbi by the name of Eliezer Ashkenazi, who lived from 1512 to 1585 and was sort of like an itinerant rabbi. He grew up and was first a rabbi in Egypt, and then he traveled through Europe, and he was a rabbi in a number of communities. And for a period of time, he was this rabbi in Prague, and he basically instituted the first Chevra Kadisha, describing the basic outlines of what a Chevra Kadisha would do in terms of taking care of a person when they passed away. But he didn't write down the liturgy. He just wrote various takanot, various amendments helping create the group. The liturgy for the Chevra Kadisha, the first time we see anything written down, is actually in 1626. And the book is called Ma'avar Yabok, which means crossing the Yabok. And by the way, I don't know if people are aware of this. The Yabok River, does anyone, will just play a little biblical, trivial pursuit. Where does the Yabok River come up? You know the story. You'll be like, oh, once I tell you. It's the river that Jacob crosses to get back into the land of Israel. Right? So Ma'avar Yabok, right? He's talking about rituals, and this is why the title is so very, very, very profound. He's talking about rituals to take us across a divide back to the promised land. Right? That's what the title of his book implies, and that's what that ritual is really about. Right? The ritual of the Chevra Kadisha is to help prepare a person in a physical and spiritual way to cross over, ma'avor, right, that chasm into that next world. And it's in this book. Oh, and this is written, by the way, by a guy by the name of Aaron Barachia, who's known as Aaron Barachia of Modena. He was an Italian Kabbalist, and he was prolific. Right, so Ma'avar Yavok is just one book that he wrote, but he wrote any number of commentaries on the classics of Kabbalah. And in his Ma'avar Yavok, we have, it basically comprises of the readings, the laws, and the customs relating to sick, deathbed, burial, and mourning rituals. And it is really the or text for the Chevra Kadisha liturgy, which is to say, we have really, as I said before, nothing before. And then this book comes out, and it becomes sort of the foundation for the rituals and for the liturgy itself for the Chevra Kadisha. Any questions so far about anything? This is just by way of a little bit of historical background, just so people have a sense of where we're coming from. What I would point out is the main takeaway that I hope people would take from this is, yeah, this is all minhag. This is all custom. This isn't written down. This isn't like kashrut or Shabbat, where you have the guidelines laid down early on in the Torah and then get expanded on, right? This is much more clouded in history, much more amorphous, and much more, therefore, subject to the various customs of the local Chevra Kadisha. And each one, in a sense, has its own parameters and guidelines that it uses, and they also have a fair amount of flexibility in terms of the liturgy. How much, how little, and so forth. There's nothing or anyone who's going to say it must be just this way. And having said that, what's so interesting is if one looks at the various liturgies of all the different kinds of Chevra Kadishas, from the more progressive, if you will, to the more traditional, what's fascinating is how many of them keep to some form of the traditional liturgy, irrespective. Tweaks here or there, but oftentimes a lot of the liturgy is kept. So before we then actually start talking about an outline and a conceptual framework for what this moment is about, are there any questions in terms of any history that I might be able to answer? Okay, So let's dive into now the actual moment, the Chevra Kadisha. So the Chevra Kadisha's main functions are twofold. One is providing what we might call a shomer, or a guard, or a witness, someone who attends to and stays present with the mate, the person who has passed away, from the time they passed away until the time that they are buried. From the point of view of Jewish tradition, ideally, a person is never left alone. And what's interesting is, as I mentioned before, when it came to processions, this idea of not leaving a meitah, or a mate, alone is, again, widespread. A lot of different cultures have this custom. What's interesting is that there's different reasons that different cultures offer it up, but many cultures have this. And that is the first part of what a Chevra Kadisha does. The second part is the more involved part ritually, and that's referred to as the Tahara. And this refers to the overall ritual itself, as well as to a specific moment within the ritual. So a Tahara really has, I'm going to give like a very brief 6-point outline. And I want to share one text that sort of frames what conceptually the Tahara is about. So actually, let's go to the text first. Hold on a second. Let me pull it up for everybody.
While Rabbi is pulling that up, if I may add, there's some ideas that the shomer, the attending to the body back in the day, the Talmudic days anyway, there were some practical reasons for attending and guarding the body. People were worried about bodies being stolen, or bodies being attacked by animals or rats, etc. So we believe that there might have been some very practical reasons back in the day for the shomer, in addition to whatever spiritual or religious aspects.
Yeah, it's as I said, tons of different reasons that are offered up, both by Jewish culture as well as others. So this is the text that I would like to share with you in terms of getting a sense of what Tahara is about. And the reason why I share this text is actually in the liturgy of the Tahara itself, right? And this is what it says. It comes from one of the later prophets known as Zechariah. This is after the destruction of the first temple, when he's offering this prophecy, while the temple itself is in the process of being rebuilt and a new high priest is being initiated. And this is what the Zechariah says. Now Joshua was dressed in filthy clothes as he stood before the angel. The angel said to those who are standing before him, "Take off his filthy clothes." Then he said to Joshua, "See, I've taken away your sin. I have put fine garments on you." Right? So this text is used in the early part of the liturgy as a way of indicating several things. First, if you use this text as your framework, the person who has passed away, how are they being seen as? Who are they analogous to in this text, do you think?
Joshua.
Right? They would be Joshua. And Joshua is the one who's about to become the high priest. Right? So in a sense, what the text says is that each mate, each person who lies before us, right, is to be seen as if they were the high priest, the highest religious office in that one could have in the eyes of the Torah, the one who is to be seen as the closest to the conduit to the Lord. Right. So this is how the mate is being seen. And it is said that the mate has filthy clothes. So what happens? The mate has to be clean. Right. And the mate is clean. But when the mate is cleaned, when the person is cleaned, right, what do they say? "See, I've taken away your sin." Right. So it's not just a physical cleaning, but it is a spiritual cleaning that allows the person to return back to the source of life, to the divine, in the same way, with the same level of, fill in the word, purity, innocence, openness to the world with which they came. And the The Tahara itself, as I said, it's a very simple 6-part step. There's actually lots of ways of breaking it down, but here's the way that I would share it with everyone, which is the first part of a Tahara. The Tahara team does what's called mechila, which is forgiveness. And what they do is they ask forgiveness from the person who's passed away, who they're attending to, or they ask for forgiveness on behalf of the person who's passed away. And then they ask for forgiveness from God on behalf of the mate, of the person who's passed away, and also for any mistakes that they make. And what's fascinating with that is it shows that there's 3 parties that are present when one does a Tahara, right? There's the person who's passed away, the mate. There's the Tahara team, the group of people in there helping out. And then there's God. And the Tahara team, in a sense, serves as the go-between, right? And so they ask for forgiveness from the mate for themselves, from God for the mate, right? Then there is the first washing, which is just a basic physical washing of the body, right? Removing any kind of nail polish, dirt underneath the nails, anything that may have got accrued or gathered onto the body. The body is cleaned as thoroughly as possible and as respectfully as possible. And then after which is referred to as the rechitza. After the rechitza, there is the tahara, right, which is the actual pouring of the water on. Now, you might say, yeah, but you've already done rechitza, what's tahara? As I said before, there's a physical cleaning and a spiritual cleaning, and the tahara is the spiritual cleaning. And this is the moment that actually is, in a sense, ritually, it's 9 pails of water that are done continuously over the body, right, to clean the whole body. And it's meant to be done like as soon as one bucket of water is finished, the next one starts immediately. And after that, there is what's known as the habasha, the dressing. And after that, there's the halvana, which is the placing of the mates in the aron, in the casket, in the coffin. And then the last step is concluding prayers. Now, this is a really, really simple outline, and there are people who are in this room who have done Taharas who will tell you there are so many different details and so many twists and turns to all of this. But I just wanted to give people an overall sense of it so that one can have a sense of the power of what it is that we're engaged in as we help prepare this person for what is ostensibly their final journey and their reuniting again with the divine. And I would just conclude with the following note, and then I'm going to turn things over to Steve, and I've talked way too long. Sorry about that, Steve. Learning how long the presentation takes. And that is the following. It's often that people don't speak about work that they do on a Chevra Kadisha. One of the customs of the Chevra Kadisha is you don't boast about it. You don't share. You're like, oh, I'm on a Chevra Kadisha. It's meant to be just done quietly and as anonymously as possible. The problem is that people then extended that to be like, oh, one should never talk about Chevra Kadishas, which is why so many people don't know about what the Chevra Kadisha is and what it does, or any of its history. So it's a great opportunity for us to be able to share some of this with you, and we really appreciate being able to do so. Mr. Poretzky, take it away.
Thank you for that, all that background, Rabbi. Even though you said you went long, I know there's so much more. And so I want to invite just to tell everyone that hopefully we'll leave lots of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. And if we don't get to your questions, or if you come up with questions that you want to ask later, feel free to contact us after the fact also. You might have seen our email addresses at the beginning. I'll give you our contact information again later on. So my name is Steve Poretzky, as opposed to Rabbi. Many of you don't know me. So by way of quick background of myself, I've lived in Encino for the last 32 years with my wife and 2 kids. I've spent a long time at Temple Judea in Tarzana. For the last 6 years, I've been a member at Shomrei Torah Synagogue in West Hills. My career was in finance, and banking. But for the last 3 years of my working life, which I was executive director at Shomrei Torah Synagogue. I retired about 3 years ago, just before COVID hit, unfortunately. It was bad timing all around. Okay, so that's a thumbnail of me. First, let's talk about why we formed the Valley Chevra Kadisha. We're going to talk about why we formed it and how we formed it. Okay, those are the two main topics. And then the last piece I want to go over with you quickly is what it all might mean for you and your loved ones. Okay, so why we formed it. There are two main reasons why we formed Valley Chevra Kadisha. First, as Rabbi says, Jews know very little about our beautiful end-of-life traditions, and almost nothing about Chevra Kadishas. Individually and as a group, it's very difficult often to make informed decisions about end-of-life issues, at least from a Jewish perspective. And it's a shame because the tradition provides so much wisdom and so much benefit. Let me share a slide. So, can everyone see that? Okay. Benefits are powerful, and the benefits are broad. For the deceased, for the mate or matah, tahara and shmirah, as Rabbi described, are beautiful spiritual services, providing with loving kindness and infused with ancient wisdom. For the mourners, knowing that volunteers from the community are caring for their loved ones with respect and honor can be a substantial support for them in their time of loss. And for the community, the Chevra provides an opportunity to perform a powerful mitzvah in accordance with ancient custom, one that can never be repaid. Just for an idea of the potential impact on mourners, take a look at this and listen to this portion of a mother's letter after her daughter's tahara. At that moment, the community did what I could not. 4 women, whose names I never knew, reached out and performed a mitzvah for our family that I will never be able to repay. 4 mothers, who will never publicly be thanked or recognized, performed the ritual cleansing and sanctification of Rivka and buried her. They were the last ones to see her body and to say goodbye. It was utterly the lowest point in my life, and I was carried forward by people who are still anonymous. Somehow it is reassuring to know that when you really can go no further, your community will reach out and carry you and those that you love. Beautiful sentiment. We have similar quotes from members of our Chevra, members of the community who are actually performing the service, who actually perform the service in terms of the impact that it has on them and their view of life, for example. Many people have walked out of the Tahara room after providing service saying that they feel rejuvenated and they feel less scared of death and all of the things involved with it. And that can have a large impact on your life. But how can one choose to participate in such a beautiful tradition without the requisite knowledge? It's impossible. So a big part of Valley Chevra Kadisha's mission is community education. We want people to be able to make informed decisions about Jewish aspects of their death, and hopefully many of them will choose the services of the Valley Chevra Kadisha. One of our goals is therefore to connect with Jews wherever they gather, at congregations, JCCs, schools, and also other groups that connect with end-of-life professionals like chaplains, death doulas, hospice staff, funeral home staff, etc. Such as we're doing tonight. The other reason we formed is that in addition to these good reasons for people to choose Chevra Kadisha services, There are about 500,000 Jews in Los Angeles not served by Chevra Kadishas. I'll get a little bit more into that in a moment. But in any event, this is what a venture capitalist would call a large unserved market. So that's the summary of why we formed. Now let's talk a little bit about how, because it's important to know how, because it informs what we do. So there are two basic models for Chevra Kadishas. There's a synagogue-based model and there's a community-based model. The synagogue model generally has people who provide service exclusively to the synagogue's members and their families. We're aware of 3 synagogue-based chevras in Los Angeles, serving 4 populations. They are Temple Israel of Hollywood, Temple Sinai, and a relatively new joint venture between Temple Beth Am and Ikar. So there are, and these groups do provide service for their members only. So we decided to go broad and create a community-based Chevra Kadisha, which draws volunteers from anywhere in the community and which provides services to all Jews, regardless of their affiliation or lack thereof, and regardless of their level of observance. There's 4 large synagogues out there that provide this service to their members, but taken as a percentage of the entire Jewish population of Los Angeles, it's tiny. It's a couple of percent. So we want to make sure that these beautiful end-of-life services are available to all who want them. A little background: in January of 2022, just a little bit more than a year ago, Rabbi Richard Kamras of Shomrei Torah Synagogue and I worked together with Kavod V'Nechum, which is an industry association which provides resources and training to Chevra Kadishas. We put together 2 introductory courses for potential volunteers. We publicized the courses through a bunch of synagogues. We ended up recruiting about 16 volunteers, many of whom joined our leadership team. Rabbi Bernhard joined soon thereafter to become, as he says, my partner in crime. We incorporated as a 501c3. We raised funds. We built a website, which I'll show you a bit of in a moment. We organized a liturgy. We met with local funeral homes. And with the help of Kavod V'Nechum, we trained a bunch of volunteers in Shmirah and in Tahara. We currently have 55 amazing volunteers, comprised of 33 women and 22 men, because women do taharas for women and men do taharas for men. We have a leadership team of 18. We have a rabbinic advisory group of 5 rabbis. Our soft launch was in November, just a few months ago, and I'm happy to say that we recently provided our first service, both Shmirah and Tahara. So we're off and running. We do not charge for our services, be they Tahara, be they Shmirah, or be they educational, and we fundraise to defray costs. I do want to show you our website because, if I can find it. Our website, which is valleychevrakadisha.org, very clever. This is our homepage. We've set it up so that our services can easily be requested through the website itself. You can, first of all, you can on our volunteer page, you can register to volunteer, to work with us if you want. You just provide your information here, hit enter, and we get the information and contact you, and we'll work with you. We have on the Contact Us page, I don't know if that's too small to read, but here we go. Maybe that's a little bit better. In order to request a tahara or a shmirah, all you have to do is click on this box, and it takes you to a page where we ask certain information of you, and we swing into action. We may contact you for more additional information. We may not need to, but we're off and running in that regard. There's another page on our education page where you can do the same for educational services. You can request that someone from Chevra Kadisha come and present information and provide education to your group, to your group. We have also made some interesting resources available on our resources page. This is a letter, which I'll show you in more detail in a moment, which is called My Burial Wishes. And let me show you a little bit more easier to read format. What it does is it's a form letter, and it's written in the format of a person writing to his or her family. And the letter says, I want to share with you some of my wishes in terms of my burial when the time comes. And it goes on to talk about tahara and choosing tahara and shmirah services and contacting Chevra Kadisha. And it also provides a variety of check boxes so that you can tell your family members, your loved ones, that you want to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, you don't want to be cremated, whatever your wishes are, just simply check the box. If you have other things that you want to mention, there's allowance for that too. And then the idea is that you would make copies of this letter and give it to your loved ones, give it to your rabbi. If you've done pre-planning, give it to your funeral director, give it to the folks who need to have this information when the time comes. It's a wonderful pre-planning tool. I highly recommend pre-planning, whether it includes this or not. But if you, for the benefit of yourself and for the benefit of your loved ones, I really think it's a smart thing to do. So I'll come back to this in a moment. Another resource that we have is our brochure, which you can download from the website. You can see it's a twofold brochure, and it gives a very basic outline about what we are, who we serve. It's an introductory thing. It can be a useful tool if you want to let somebody else know about who we are, for instance. So, as I said before, one of our top priorities is community education, like we're doing here today. We believe, let me stop sharing. We believe that the more people we educate, the more we'll choose to use our services as part of a set of informed end-of-life decisions. So that's the how of what we've done. The last part of what I'm going to talk about is the part that could affect you. A couple of suggestions for you. One, introduce us to other interested organizations other than High Neighbors. I'm sure you all are plugged into various degrees to other organizations that you're a part of or know of that might be interested in our message. You can contact Jonathan or me. Organizations need not be Jewish, but they certainly can be synagogues or hospices or chaplaincy organizations that serve Jews. They could also serve non-Jews. But the key thing is that there's at least a partial Jewish clientele that would make it of interest for the folks at the organization to know about these traditions and these services. They can be schools, they can be hospitals, they can be funeral homes, death doula groups, advanced directive specialists like social workers, attorneys, death discussion groups like death cafes. There are just an almost unending number of types of groups that might benefit from hearing more about us. So think about that. As you become more familiar with us, think about other groups that might be interested in hearing. Go to our resources page, as I just showed you. click on that My Jewish Burial Wishes letter, print it out, fill it out for yourself, give it to your loved ones. It's an action that everyone, all of your loved ones will appreciate when the time comes. And hopefully you can rest easier too, knowing that you've done that. Ask your family and friends to do the same. And let them provide that benefit to their loved ones too. If you have questions or want further information before doing so, feel free to contact us. So tell your friends and family about us in general. Send them the link to our website and our brochure. Place copies of our brochure in your synagogue or your synagogues and in other places where Jews gather. And last but not least, if you feel the interest, volunteer with us. You can do Tahara. You can do Shmirah. There are lots of other volunteer roles that we have in terms of outreach, in terms of web maintenance, in terms of dispatch. We have a whole group of volunteers who put together teams to do the Taharas and to do the Shmirahs. So you can be in front of dead bodies or not, as you choose. So those are the things I ask that you consider doing for both yourselves and for us. So thank you for your attention. Questions, please, for Jonathan or me. Lisa.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation.
Are you still muted or no?
No, I'm not. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm not well, and while I've been doing, very well with my particular cancer, I know that I would like to die at home. And in doing so, does Chevra Kadisha collect my body? Who collects my body?
I have a couple of questions. I have a couple of answers for you.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, the work of the Chevra can be done in your home.
Mm-hmm.
It is typically done at a mortuary.
Oh.
They often have a good setup, a good room. Some of them have a Tahara room, but even if they don't have a specific Tahara room, they often have the facilities to be able to handle bodies and things like that. Mm-hmm. But the Shmirah and Tahara, or Shmirah or Tahara, can be done. Can also be done at your home. So that's one thing. But Jonathan, I think, knows better than I. But I think the coroner or the funeral home staff mm-hmm. are two among those who might come to the home to transport it to a mortuary.
I have another question, which is, have you ever had family members participate in their loved ones?
Do you want to take that one?
Chevra Kadisha?
So there are, needless to say, more than one train of thought on this within the Jewish community as to the wisdom of one practice or the other. So some Chevra Kadishas have very strict policies, not permitting family members to participate at all. Mm-hmm. And others have them participate, but generally not in the actual washing, but just to be present. As of now, and we're a young Chevra, so we're sort of learning, as of now, our policy is to not have family members participate.
Okay.
But I will say, Lisa, as far as Shmirah is concerned, as far as attending to the body, we encourage family members to participate in that aspect of the Chevra's work. There's a lot less involved in terms of training, and there's a lot less sort of emotional impact. But to sit in the same room as the body in an aron, or next to in a room next to where the body is sitting, and to recite psalms and prayers, and to talk be able to communicate and commune with the deceased can be an awfully cathartic and useful thing for family members. As a matter of fact, it was my first introduction personally when my dad died about 20 years ago. My family was sitting with the funeral director, and he said, "Steve, do you want to sit Shmirah for your father?" And I said, "I would do it, but I don't know what it is." And he explained it to me, and I ended up sitting with my father all night. And for me, it was a powerful way of saying goodbye to him, of having conversation with him, and getting closure. helping get closure for me. And I never forgot that. And when the opportunity came to work with Jonathan and to work with Rabbi Cameras, I jumped on it. So a little different for the Shmirah than for the Tahara.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And also just one quick thing is the first call is to the mortuary. It's not the coroner who comes, it's the mortuary.
Okay.
So whatever plans you have in place, that would be the call you make, and then they would be in touch, and they come fairly, they're fairly quick.
Thank you.
Jill?
Thank you for the presentation. My mother passed away in November toward the end of the month. And we talked with our rabbi before she passed away because he wanted to know if we had made arrangements and how could he be helpful and all of those things. And he mentioned Tahara and Shmirah. He did not mention Chevra Kadisha. I don't know if you guys were really operating at that time. She passed away on November 20th. So I guess my first question, since Jonathan, for sure, you know the rabbis of both of our synagogues, if they will talk to the families of their congregants when the congregants pass away to make them aware of Chevra Kadisha. So that's number one. And number two, I talked with someone who did Shmirah for, I guess, the first opportunity you had, or was involved in the process. And I was told that the people doing Shmirah could not be in the same room with the body. And that's not very comforting when I think about it. Because if you're not really with the body, it just doesn't feel like it kind of feels like, what's the point? So I guess one of my questions is, how cooperative are the mortuaries with you? Because they offer the same services for which they charge.
So how about Steve, I take the first part, you take the second?
Fine.
Okay, so in terms of clergy, so curious thing, in the same way that I think it's fair to say for many here today, learning about the Chevra Kadisha, we're all probably fairly new to it, right? In the same way that we're all fairly new to it, I will say on the clergy side, the clergy are also kind of new to it as well, which is to say, it's not that we don't know the rough outlines of it, but a lot of us, it's not been part of our training in a deep way. And it's just not something that we ever really thought that much about. And I am as guilty of that as anybody, having served the congregation for 25 years and never really made it a focus. It's just sort of, it wasn't really on the radar. So part of what our work as a Chevra Kadisha do, part of the outreach we do is just to the clergy to kind of begin informing them and kind of putting it more on their radar. And the truth is, Rabbi Schuldenfrei mentioned it, I suspect, in part because we had sent out some stuff because we had just sort of opened up our soft landing or soft opening, if you will, at the beginning of November. So you can see it's working its way into kind of where he's coming from, but it takes time. It takes time to kind of have that awareness and takes time to know exactly the right way to be talking about it and offering it. And our hope is that over time, as we continue to educate ourselves and educate them, they will serve as educators for the congregations.
Okay.
As far, let's see, the second question. Well, the Shmirah. Okay, so a couple of things. Our first Shmirah was performed at Sinai, and they're undergoing a big construction project right now. So that was part of the issue. But I think the bigger issue is pre-COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID, and I've asked folks around the country, actually, I'm in a group that includes people in Chevra Kadishas from different cities around the country. I've asked them about pre-COVID practices and during COVID practices, and they've changed. Pre-COVID, it was pretty typical to be in the room with the body. When COVID hit, all that went away. At first, before vaccines, The practice was people didn't even go to the funeral, to the mortuary. The people from the Chevra Kadisha didn't even physically travel out of their homes. They did what they called Shmira Rechinut, which was a remote version. Maybe they set up a camera at the funeral home, and they were able to, perform their service, but do it remotely. I mean, it was after vaccines came in and we became a little bit more comfortable. Then people started going back to the funeral homes, but nobody really knowing 100% about what was safe and what wasn't safe. People were separated in adjacent rooms often, rather than being in the room with the deceased. How things are going to shake out as we get more comfortable with COVID, and hopefully, hopefully it becomes a flu-like event in our lives over time. I hope that we will revert back to the old practices. We will see. And hopefully the construction at Sinai will end, and they're actually building a new Tahara room, and they're building updated facilities, and hopefully they'll be able to accommodate the old practices again. But honestly, it's their place, it's their rules. We'll have to see, what we're able to do.
I just have to say that doesn't make sense. If you're in the room doing Tahara, which is pretty intimate, how could you not then sit in a room on a chair with the body that's already been cleansed? And I don't think you're going to get COVID from a dead person. So it just doesn't,
People stopped doing Taharas also. People stopped also doing in-person Taharas for quite a long time during
right, but you did it, as you said, at Mount Sinai. I don't mean to argue with you. I'm just saying it doesn't make sense to me. And if I would choose to do it when I pass away, which hopefully won't be for a long time, I would want, if I'm going to choose Shmira, I would want the person in the room. And so my last question is, if the mortuaries are cooperative with you, given that they can charge for the same service?
It's a complicated question. The simple answer is that yes, they cooperate. They've been very friendly to us. They've been providing this service for decades and decades to the community for a fee.
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is the funeral homes don't make money on this service. They pass along that fee to the people who provide the service. So it's not as if it's a money-making event for them. So they're happy to provide it if people want it. They're not out there selling it like a fancy casket. Mortuary's got to make a living too, right? So they're certainly cooperative, but it's on their price list. It's on their options list. Honestly, I haven't been in the room, so I don't know if if they push it or how hard they sell it, or even if they do sell it, if they talk about it in all circumstances or not. I can say that I am hopeful, as you are, that as COVID hopefully continues to shrink away, that we'll get back to the more common practice of being close to the ones that we're providing service to.
Well, I have to tell you, we used Hillside as the mortuary, and they mentioned the services, Shomer and Tahara. They did not push it, but they definitely let us know that it was available, and they'd be happy to arrange for it.
Yeah, it's our view that our ability to provide services to family is going to be a function of folks like yourself being aware of the Chevra and its work and requesting it. And for someone who's walking into a funeral home whose loved one has just died, it's often not on their radar. I mean, you have to know in advance. You have to do a little bit of pre-planning, have a little bit of pre-knowledge and pre-thought. Otherwise, it's just unfair.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're here. Anyone else? I know your name's not Lawrence, but that's what's showing.
Bobby, you have to unmute yourself.
I asked the question above there.
Sarita, where's Bobby's going to go first, then we'll come over to you.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm just asking, what is the feeling about cremation? Because that is becoming more and more of an issue among people.
Right. So the traditional rabbinic view about cremation is that really, for the most part, not viewed favorably in terms of a way of taking care of one's body when one dies. So there's really first primarily the tradition in Jewish tradition, even though what I said before in terms of the Torah not talking a lot about it, is the tradition is really in-ground burial as relatively reasonably soon as possible. And those two things have sort of been the predominant understanding. Cremation is viewed as being destructive of the body and not showing, and not a means of showing respect for it. And therefore, it's generally, people are generally in the rabbinic community are like, yeah, we don't encourage and we don't necessarily care for it. However, one of the things that has changed is that whereas before someone would get cremated and like the rabbi would never talk about it, and they would never do a service, certainly not anywhere near the time that a cremation took place. What you do see is clergy becoming a little bit more flexible in that regard. Vis-a-vis the Chevra Kadisha, just so you know, there are a traditional Chevra Kadisha would not do a tahara if it was going to be followed by a cremation. Our Chevra Kadisha, however, does not take that point of view. Our Chevra Kadisha takes the point of view that if anybody wants a tahara, irrespective of how they are choosing for themselves to dispose of their body, we will do a tahara for them.
In addition to the view that burning the body is almost viewed as a violent act against the body and not necessarily, honoring the dead body or the deceased. There are a lot of lines drawn, and there's an analogy to the Holocaust that people understand. That in modern times we have the additional reason to not consider cremation because of what happened during World War II, which is a powerful argument for many. Despite all of that, cremation has become more and more of a choice that's taken, both because of cost. The cremation does tend to be less costly than in-ground burial. And in the long run, what I want our Chevra Kadisha to work on is to help our constituents, our clients, as it were, figure out how to reduce the cost of funerals. Offering our service for free is step one. And then I think often people think mistakenly that cremation is more ecologically positive, which is not the case. And people just need to. I don't want to go into it tonight. It's a whole discussion in and of itself. But there are a lot of chemicals and a lot of energy used in cremation, and there's a lot of bad stuff put in the air, and it's not as the traditional Jewish burial is very ecologically forward.
That's actually probably going a little bit too far.
That the last statement?
Yeah.
But the in-ground burial?
If it were in the ground.
Yeah.
But a casket in a cement vault.
Oh, no. Well, cement vault. I'm talking about a plain wooden box in the ground.
I know, and I'm talking about the way people get buried in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So here in LA, right, it is arguably not just as simple of being buried in the ground because you have a vault. And so that's part of what also sets people off about it.
Rabbi, do you know, do different cemeteries have different rules about that?
Well, here's the one rule they have, which is every cemetery that uses it claims that it's a state law when it's not.
Right. It's cemetery by cemetery rules.
It's honestly, it's really cemetery by cemetery.
Okay.
Because there's no state or local municipal laws whatsoever about it. Sarita, you had your hand up.
Yes, Sarita.
I was saying that I'd mentioned CK to a friend whose mom was dying because he didn't know anything about it. And I told him to ask his rabbi. You just said we're not supposed to tell people that we're involved in CK.
Well, no, hold on. Okay. Okay. Talking about what we do, right, is something that for the most part, Chevra Kadishas don't, right? We don't go into details. We don't share, right, the people who we're necessarily providing services for, right? Talking about being in a Chevra Kadisha and just saying, I'm in this is a Jewish custom is totally fine.
Okay.
What I was saying is that the anonymity that's meant to be associated with the work got associated with the work itself.
That's right.
Not saying I did so and so. I was one of the
Right.
volunteers who did your father.
Right, exactly. That's the kind of stuff. That's why the letter that Steve mentioned that he read a piece from said these 4 women who I will not know, right? Because they're not meant to be known.
Right. Okay.
Right.
We should never. We don't discuss what happens in the Tahara room. We don't discuss who we provide services for. But here we are talking in general about what the Chevra Kadisha is, what services we provide, with what loving kindness the community is supporting the bereaved. That is something to be celebrated, and that is something to be communicated for sure. Here we are.
Any other
Tell your
questions?
friends.
Any other?
Should we wrap up?
Yes.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all very much. It's been great to be able to kind of do some learning with everybody again, and to see, as I said, some familiar faces there. It's really quite wonderful. So on behalf of Steve and myself, thank you for the opportunity, to Gary and Linda for organizing and inviting us to be able to be a part of this. Really appreciate it. And any questions that people have by way of follow-up, you have my email or we can get it to you. Steve also shared his email. Please feel free to be in touch with us or get us through the Valley Chevra Kadisha website.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.